Welcome to Module 5 Project Scope Management Module Overview. In this video we will cover what is scope, two types of scope, predictive and adaptive life cycles, a common misunderstanding about scope and tailoring considerations. And in other videos in this module we will cover the following processes. 5.1 Plan Scope Management, the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project and product scope will be defined, validated and controlled. 5.2 Collect Requirements, the process of determining, documenting and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. 5.3 Define Scope, the process of developing a detailed description of the project and product. 5.4 Create Work Breakdown Structure, the process of subdividing project deliverables and project work into smaller, more manageable components. 5.5 Validate Scope, the process of formalizing acceptance of the completed project deliverables. 5.6 Control Scope, the process of monitoring the status of the project and product scope and managing changes to the scope baseline. What is scope? Many words used in project management have either a different or broader meaning than the everyday meaning, but in the case of scope management, the word scope in project management is similar to its everyday meaning. It means what is included in something. If you watch an old-time murder mystery movie, you may hear a detective say, "We are widening the scope of our investigation to include the butler and the gamekeeper." This means they were investigating a certain group of people, but now they've enlarged the scope, they've enlarged the group to include two more people. And if you watch a lot of old-time murder mystery movies, I'm sure you would agree that often it's a very good idea to include the butler and the gamekeeper. And likewise, within a project, the scope means what's included in the project. On the surface this seems a very simple concept, and yet it is often an area that causes significant problems and confusion, and is often a major contributing factor to failures in a project such as rework, cost and time overruns, and arguments about the quality of deliverables. And as you will find out later in the course, quality means conformance to specification rather than the grade of an item. If you don't record everything that is agreed to be within scope, that is everything that is included in the project, there will be no way to tell if the project was successful or even if you finished the project. I wanted to buy a camera kit online recently and I was searching for it. A number of sellers were advertising the kit I wanted, but I noticed that one seller is advertising the kit for about 15% less than the other sellers. My first thought was the camera may not be new or may not be genuine, but I saw in the advert it was brand new and guaranteed to be genuine. Then I thought that shipping may be charged as an extra, but it was included. My next thought was that the camera kit may be missing components, so I checked the advert. At the bottom it was entitled "What's in the Box?" So I checked what's in the box list and I confirmed nothing was missing. And so if your project was intended to deliver the camera kit, the scope of your project would be the "What's in the Box" list. Another important consideration is defining scope is that you may also need to define what is out of scope, or to put it another way, what is not included. This may seem a bit strange because there is an endless list of things that won't be included in your project. For example, if your project is intended to build a brick wall, your wall won't include batteries or a V8 engine or carpets. But of course, you aren't going to put batteries, V8 engine or carpets as being out of scope. Therefore, the trick is that whenever you list what is not in the scope of your project, you should list only the things which a buyer might reasonably expect to be included but are not included. Again, I'll give you another example from online shopping. Yes, I do a lot of online shopping. I was thinking of buying a radio-controlled drone. I was interested in a particular model. As I browsed the adverts, again I noticed one seller was cheaper than the others. I checked the advert and there were photos of the drone and the transmitter and the people flying the drone and photos and videos that the drone had taken. This time there was no what's in the box section in the advert, but I could see in the photo there's a drone, the transmitter, all the bits and pieces. I was about to buy one from this particular supplier, but then I happened to notice that the rating left by customers was low. I read a few reviews and they all said the same thing. There is no transmitter provided with the drone, but uses a radio controlled drone without the radio controller. I checked the advert again and at the very bottom in a tiny font it said, transmitter not included. When you buy a radio controlled device, it is totally reasonable to assume that the transmitter would be included, and so this should have been very clearly marked as out of scope. However, if you were to shop for a refrigerator online, the refrigerator in the advertisements is usually shown packed full of food and drinks. But in this case, it would not be reasonable to expect your new fridge to be delivered packed full of food. But often you will see a disclaimer under the picture which says, contents of fridge for illustration only. Or to put it another way, if you buy this refrigerator, food is out of scope. And another common out of scope item for electronic goods is batteries not included. Okay, so now we know what in scope means and what out of scope means. We have a look in the PMBOK guide on page 722, and that defines what scope is. It's the sum of the products, services and results to be provided as a project. That's in PMBOK guide page 722. And please remember all of these definitions for the examination. Now this seems pretty clear. I read that again. The sum of products, services and results to be provided as a project. But there's a twist to it, because in a project there are actually two scopes, not just one. The two scopes are project scope and product scope, and the project manager must manage both of them. So what are these two scopes then? The first, the project scope, means the features and functions that characterize a product, service or result. That's in the PMBOK guide page 715. And so everything I've been talking about so far is really the product scope, the what's in the box. What is project scope then? The PMBOK guide says on page 717, project scope is the work performed to deliver the product, service or result with the specified features or functions. And those specified features are what are listed in the scope statement. The project scope management includes the processes required to ensure the project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. This means the product scope is what's in the box, and the project scope is any work required to make the components and pack them into the box. Here's a tip for you. Many times questions on the exam about scope will be concerned with project scope. That is, the activities that you have to do in order to create and deliver the product, service or result. But if the question talks about features and characteristics of the project, deliverables such as dimensions, colour, weight, quantities, it is talking about product scope. And so I've found it's actually quite easy to work out if it's a product scope question by looking for these dimensions and colours and weights and things. If they're not there, it is project scope. These two scopes to be managed in a project, as I said, but it's important to know that they're both on a single document. There is only one scope statement. There's not two scope statements. The other definition that often appears in the exam is product scope description, the documented narrative description of the product scope. That's from PMBOK guide page 724. On the same page you will find the definition for statement of work, SOW, sometimes just called the SAR, a narrative description of products, services or results to be delivered by the project. These two definitions seem very similar, but the difference is that the scope statement contains a narrative description of the product scope for the entire project, whereas a statement of work is a narrative description of the product scope for a single deliverable, a single product. And so If our project is intended to create the camera kit that I was talking about before, the product scope description is a list of what's in the box, but there will be a statement of work for the parts to make up a camera. Another statement of work will be the parts that make up the lens system, and so on. Predictive and adaptive life cycles. Listing all the bits and bobs that make up the project scope and product scope is just one part of the process. Many years ago, a significant body of work revolved around this very process. Lots of stakeholders would meet a number of times until the scope for the entire project had been worked out in advance. This approach is referred to as predictive life cycle. The main problem with the fully predictive life cycle approach revolves around the impossibility of predicting the future in all but the simplest projects. The fact is that people don't really know what they want at the start of the project. They may think that they do, they may be convinced that they do, they may argue black and blue, they know every bit and bob of it, but that delusion quickly melts away when the project starts. The project produces products or partial projects, and suddenly the client realizes that the product that they asked for is not actually what they wanted. On seeing the product, it may stimulate ideas for enhancements, and these circumstances lead to a need for change. You can and must manage change in a project, but in general you can't prevent it. Now imagine you've spent many weeks, a lot of money creating a large scope statement in predictive fashion. The client is requesting changes, and the Change Control Board, the CCB, agrees to the changes. This means that you must complete another body of work to modify the scope statement, then more changes come. At the other end of the spectrum, from a predictive life cycle point of view, there is an adaptive life cycle or agile life cycle. In short, this means having a scope statement which contains requirements at a very high level, i.e. very little detail. And these details are not worked out until you're just about to perform the work. This means an adaptive life cycle can be easily changed to match changing requirements. The list of high-level requirements in an adaptive life cycle are often referred to as the product backlog, and instead of proceeding in a serial fashion, the requirements are repeatedly sorted into priority order, and the highest priority requirements are processed first in each iteration. A benefit of the adaptive approach is that the client gets the components they need most in the soonest possible time. One downside is that representatives of the client organization need to be constantly involved in the process. It definitely can't be a hands-off process for them. Examination tip. Completion is a concept that is frequently tested on the exam. It is important to know that completion is a concept that is frequently tested in the exam. It's important to know that completion of the project scope is measured against the project management plan, whilst completion of the product scope is measured against the product requirements, and that's in PMBOK Guide page 131. And the product requirements, as we've seen, are recorded in the scope statement. There is a huge misunderstanding about this area, and I explain it more fully in the video on scope validation. But let's just say that I've heard this taught wrongly in presentations. I've seen PMP training guides get it wrong, and I've seen mock exams get it wrong too. Project scope management is used to define the products and formally accept the products, but project scope management is not concerned with checking that the products match the scope. The checking is done in the control quality process. Tailoring considerations for the project scope management. As you will see throughout the course, each knowledge area has a section called Tailoring Considerations. If you're used to Prince 2, you're probably expecting this to explain how you tailor this section. However, these sections don't actually tell you how to tailor the knowledge area. The PMBOK Guide merely lists a series of questions that you might want to think about. So if you want to think about a list of questions concerning project scope management, you will find them on page 133 of the PMBOK Guide. If they aren't in page 133, then you have the wrong edition of the PMBOK guide. You have to use the 6th edition. On the same page, you should find Trends and Emerging Practices in Project Scope Management. Requirements have always been a concern in project management and have continued to gain more attention in the profession. As the global environment becomes more complex, organisations are starting to recognise how to use business analysis to their competitive advantage by defining, managing and controlling requirements activities. Activities of business analysis may start before a project is initiated and a project manager is assigned. According to our Requirements Management, a practice guide, the requirements management process starts with a needs assessment, which may begin in portfolio management, in program management or within a discrete project. Eliciting, documenting and managing stakeholder requirements takes place within the project scope management processes. Trends and emerging practices for project scope management include a focus on collaborating with business analysis professionals to determine problems and identify business needs, identify and recommend viable solutions for meeting these needs, elicit, document and manage stakeholder requirements in order to meet business and project objectives, and facilitate the successful implementation of the project, service or end result of the program or project. The process ends with the requirements closure, which transitions a project, service or result to the recipient in order to measure, monitor, realise and sustain benefits over time. The role with responsibility to conduct business analysis should be assigned to resources with sufficient business analysis skills and expertise. If a business analyst is assigned to a project, requirements-related activities are the responsibility of that role. The project manager is responsible for ensuring that requirements-related work is accounted for in the project management plan and the requirements-related activities are performed on time and within budget to deliver value. The relationship between the project manager and the business analyst should be a collaborative partnership. A project will have a higher likelihood of being successful if project managers and business analysts fully understand each other's roles and responsibilities to successfully achieve project objectives. Considerations for agile or adaptive environments. In projects with evolving requirements, high risk or significant uncertainty, the scope is often not understood at the beginning of the project or it evolves during the project. Agile methods deliberately spend less time trying to define and agree on scope in the early stages of the project and spend more time establishing the process for its ongoing discovery and refinement. Many environments with emerging requirements find that there is often a gap between the real business requirements and the business requirements that originally stated. Therefore, agile methods purposefully build and review prototypes and release versions in order to refine the requirements. As a result, scope is defined and predefined throughout the project. In agile approaches, the requirement constitutes a backlog. In this video we covered what is scope, two types of scope, predictive and adaptive life cycles, a common misunderstanding about scope, tailoring considerations, and that brings us to the end of Project Scope Management Module Overview. The next lesson is 5.1, Plan Scope Management. Please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK guide before watching the video to increase your learning.